Chapter 21. Dust and Ashes. Alright, villain. You want to treat this like a game? Then let's play. Nedzu felt a thrill at his protege's words and couldn't help the sharp smile that came to his face even as his coworkers shivered. He wasn't 100% sure what had prompted the challenge, since Midoriya's near-constant muttering had trailed off after giving a passing analysis of who appeared to be the villain's leader, but whatever was about to happen, it was sure to be simply marvelous. Nedzu had never been more grateful than he was at that moment for his protege's mumbling habit. For never having received any training when it came to the man in chair position, as it was often fondly called, Midoriya was doing remarkably well. When he addressed his comments to the heroes, Nedzu noted that he was trying to pick the largest threats and most relevant details to mention, all while keeping his head and hacking through the system. Whatever small details his student happened to leave out were covered by his unintentional mutterings, so it all worked out. Nedzu had been a tad concerned when Midoriya had identified the glitch as the effects of a technopathic quirk, but it turned out that his worry was unfounded, as his student had bypassed even that challenge with little issue. He was so proud. He sounds so confident. All Might noted quietly. He should. Midnight whispered back. He beat a technology quirk from inside the system. And if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't know about the attack at all. Present Mike looked slightly pale, most likely wondering if the next thing Midoriya reported would be his husband's murder. Never having had interest in romantic connections himself, Nedzu couldn't even imagine what he must be going through. All they could do now, however, was get there as quickly as possible and trust Midoriya to handle the rest. Izuku checked the cameras to make sure Eraserhead was still going strong before turning his attention to the students. The plaza wasn't a disaster zone, so he didn't have nearly enough control of it to do anything useful, and if Eraserhead were here with him, he'd probably insist that Izuku help the students first. Prioritize the rescue. The students in the shipwreck zone seemed to be in the most immediate danger. There were just two students, a girl with a frog quirk and a boy with adhesive hairballs, if Izuku remembered correctly. The frog girl could probably jump to safety with little issue, but the boy was panicking too much for her to do anything without leaving him behind, something that wasn't helped by the fact that the ship was literally sinking. It must have been one of the villain's quirks that damaged it. Yep, they all had quirks that took advantage of the water. Okay, easy enough. Izuku muttered. Let's just see how useful your quirks are without any water. Izuku hit a key and the pool started draining. It was slow going at first and Izuku was almost worried that the water level wouldn't go down fast enough to do any good, until he noticed that one of the drain settings was labeled Whirlpool. Izuku clicked on it. I wonder what that does. It was as if the gates of hell had opened up beneath the villains as the water began to vortex down the drain. The villains were yelling, accusing one another of manipulating the water and creating enough general confusion that the frog girl was able to grab the ball boy by the waist and jump them both to safety. As they passed overhead, the boy started throwing his balls at the villain in a panic. Izuku almost wanted to facepalm. What kind of idiot thought it was a good idea to call attention to himself during a villain attack? It ended up working out even better than Izuku could have hoped for, though, since the balls followed the flow of the water and brushed up against the villains, making them stick to each other. By the time the two students had reached the relative safety of the shore, the pool was almost entirely empty and the villains had somehow formed a ball of bodies that would be almost impossible to escape unless those balls somehow lost their stickiness, which according to Izuku's analysis of the ball boy's quirk, wouldn't be happening anytime soon. One zone down. A lot of others to go. Todoroki seemed to have things handled in the landslide zone, and Katsuki would probably just get mad if he received any help in the ruin zone, so that left the fire zone, the downpour zone, and the mountain zone for Izuku to choose from. Izu-kun. He startled as Mei slammed the door to his workroom open. Hanzo is a boring class representative. He won't even let me make a little fire. Not now, Mei-chan. Izuku said distractedly. The kid with a tail quirk. Ojiro? He was fighting alone in the fire zone and there was a guy approaching him from behind. Mei came up behind him. Is that the USJ? Izuku took control of one of the flamethrowers and turned it up to high. Ojiro whirled around as he heard the villain scream, but couldn't waste too much time figuring out what had happened, since another villain was already running toward him, using some kind of telekinesis to control the flames. It was supposed to be a standard rescue exercise for 1A, but Mei was silent for a long moment as Izuku cut off all the fire within 50 feet of Ojiro and his current opponent. The villain's eyes widened in shock as his entire weapon supply disappeared before he could blink, but Ojiro was the first to recover, using his tail like a whip to knock the guy out. What can I do to help? Izuku glanced over at his best friend, surprised to see her looking serious for one of the first times since he'd met her. It would have been enough to creep him out if he couldn't see the familiar gleam of determination and passion in her eyes as they quickly zoomed in and out, flicking rapidly between the different screens as she took in every detail. Close the door. We don't want the other students panicking. As Mei complied, he turned his attention back to the fire zone. Ojiro had started running after he took out his last opponent, but he obviously didn't know where he was going, because he was just running deeper and deeper into the maze. He sensed Mei behind him again, so he jerked his head toward the extra chair sitting against the wall and slid over to give her room to sit beside him. With one hand, Izuku grabbed one of the earpieces from the box powerloader had left on his desk, and with the other, he created a wall of flames right in Ojiro's path to force him to turn tail. Good, he was heading in the right direction now. Izuku threw the comm to Mei right as she sat down. Channel 3, controls are on the side. I've already gotten access to the disaster zones and the teachers are on their way, so we just need to keep the students alive until they get there. Mei grinned as she plugged in another keyboard and pulled it toward her. So I do get to make explosions? Izuku couldn't help smiling back. As many as you want. Here, you can have the fire and downpour zones. I've been using the fire to guide Ojiro, that's the student with the tail, to the exit. I don't know how the ones in the downpour zone are doing. Just leave it to me, Izu-kun. Mei cackled, using a flamethrower to keep Ojiro from turning down a dead end. This is so much more fun than listening to the class representative. Midoriya, Powerloader somehow managed to sound both amused and exasperated. Did you really need to give Hatsume access to more dangerous experiments? Oh. Mei exclaimed, are those the teachers? Hi, Powerloader. Oh. Mei exclaimed, are those the teachers? Hi, Powerloader. If she handles 2 of the zones, I can focus on the mountain zone and the plaza. Izuku explained simply. Don't worry. Mei-chan knows destruction better than almost anyone I know. Powerloader groaned. That's what I'm worried about. Izuku turned his attention to the mountain zone just in time to see the girl with the earphone jack quirk, Jiro, push the electricity boy in the path of one of the villains, which didn't make any sense until the villain went down. Izuku rolled his eyes as the electricity boy gave the girls a confident thumbs up. Was his name Kaminari? Anyway, how much control did Izuku have? A full earthquake would mess up the students as well, so he should try to avoid that, but... that would work. As a villain swung to attack the creation Quirk girl. Midnight had totally helped design that costume, hadn't she? Whatever, not important right now. Just as the villain was about to land a hit, he found himself launched into the air as a pillar of rock suddenly popped up out of the ground directly beneath him. Izuku grinned. The teachers probably used this feature mostly to change the landscape and give upperclassmen a variety of landscapes and obstacles without having to constantly rely on Smontas's quirk, but he could use it to. Well, quite literally trip up the invaders, considering that he'd raised up a small ledge and made one of the villains fall flat on their face as they ran toward Jiro. Keeping one eye on the mountain zone, Izuku glanced over toward the plaza. Nedzu, is there anything I can use in the plaza? The only thing I see is the fountain, but that doesn't seem like it's going to be very useful and I don't think the villains have noticed yet, but Eraserhead is starting to slow down. There was a soft gasp on the other end of the line, but Izuku couldn't tell which of the teachers it was from. Vaguely, Izuku was aware that one of the Mountain Zone villains had popped up out of the ground and was making his way toward the plaza as well. Finally, Nedzu spoke up. There's not any disaster simulators there, but every building on campus has defense systems if you can access them. Alright, weapons. Izuku muttered and poked around for a moment. Perfect, found them. Good. Nedzu said. Now, be aware that most of the firepower is not as precise as this situation requires, and that the more lethal options might take a few minutes to warm up. Be careful, Midoriya. Izuku nodded, his throat suddenly very dry. Oh okay. That's a lot of pressure. Says the kid who's already started fighting back. Hound Dog growled. Don't overthink it, kid. Just do your best and save who you can. Everything else will have to come later. Izuku glanced at Mei, who nodded at him firmly, and he felt a flood of determination take over him. Yes, sir. I'll do my best. He took a moment to look over his weapons options, deciding to use the guns only as a last resort. It looked like the best option he had was some kind of weighted net. He shot one experimentally at a knot of villains that was standing far enough away from the fight that Izuku didn't have to worry about hitting a racerhead. The net hit the group head-on, and instantly, all action stopped as everyone in the plaza turned to look and tried to figure out where the net had come from. The leader started scratching at his neck again. After his initial success, Izuku was feeling a little more confident, so aimed another net at the leader. If he could trap him, then. Izuku fired, only for the net to disappear into a purple portal right before it hit its target. Another portal appeared near Eraserhead and the net came flying out, forcing him to dodge. Izuku grimaced. Sorry. My bad. The warp villain appeared next to the leader, looking quite a bit worse for wear from his fight with the students at the entrance. Izuku noticed a few purple balls stuck to the armor on his neck, along with chunks of concrete, so the two students from the shipwreck zone must have made it to the entrance and helped with the fight there. The two villains seemed to be talking, so Izuku scrambled to access the audio from the plaza, turning it up loud enough for both him and Mei to hear the conversation. Allowed one of the students to escape, Shigaraki. The warp villain's voice was deep and smooth. It would almost be calming if it didn't belong to a villain. He will almost definitely raise the alarm, which means that the heroes will be here soon. Izuku glanced over at the cameras for the entrance. Which student had escaped? Oh, that was perfect. The kid with the engine quirk escaped. Izuku told the teachers. He should be heading your way now. Good. Nedzu said. That means that the villains won't be expecting us so quickly. Notify us if anything else changes. Yes, sir. The leader was scratching his neck hard enough to bleed. If you weren't our escape route, Kurogiri, I'd dust you right now. And tell me, why is the information we got so far off? I was told this would be a mob raid, so how come this level is acting like a tower defense? Izuku gulped. They'd noticed his interference. He shook his head and forced himself to focus on the hints of the leader's quirk. He'd said something about dust, so did he have a quirk that allowed for dust manipulation? If so, Izuku would need to limit destruction in the plaza. The villain that Izuku had seen escape from the mountain zone stepped between the two leaders and interrupted their conversation. We have a problem. I don't know how, because I haven't deactivated my quirk since I stepped through the portal, but someone from the outside got through and seems to be using the building to fight back. The lead villain, Shigaraki, if Izuku had heard correctly, suddenly stilled. So, what you're saying is that someone is using cheat codes. The warp villain, Kurogiri apparently, interrupted the blocker's confusion with an air of professionality. I don't suppose there's a way to tell where the interference is coming from. A set of coordinates would be most appreciated. Shigaraki whirled to pin the blocker with a manic stare, only partially visible behind the creepy hand that the villain was using as a mask. Yes. Tell us where the cheater is. Now. Izuku forgot how to breathe and he could barely hear Mei's gasp beside him as she moved to crush his hand. If they figured out they were at the main school, they could warp to get them, which would put the rest of the student body in danger. The teachers were all gone to handle the attack, and if the location of the attack changed, they wouldn't be able to get here in time. The blocker took a hesitant step back and raised his hands nervously. That's not how my quirk works. I can block certain kinds of electronic signals, but I'm not a tracker. Even if I could track the interference like that, I'd end up with an IP address, which doesn't necessarily tell you where the computer is physically located. Shigaraki took his hand away from his neck and spread his fingers. Then what are you even good for? Before Izuku could even react, Shigaraki lunged and gripped the blocker's face. A strangled scream left the man's mouth before it was cut off as first his mouth, then his vocal cords, then his lungs disintegrated under the villain's touch. Within 30 seconds, the only thing left of the blocker was a pile of bones, blood, and dust. Izuku breathed. Chapter 22. Decisions. Midoriya? Present Mike's voice, much less exuberant than normal, brought him back to the present, and Izuku looked over at Mei, who looked like she was about to throw up. How long had they been sitting there? Are you and the other little listener okay? You went quiet there. And what was that about dust? Izuku swallowed the bile that was starting to climb up his throat. The leader. His quirk. He just killed. It's my fault. There was a panicked flurry of noise on the other end of the comm, but the white noise in Izuku's brain was louder. He'd never seen someone die before. If it wasn't for Izuku's interference, would Shigaraki still have killed that guy? Probably not, so it was all Izuku's fault that he was dead. Slow down, young Midoriya. All Might's voice wasn't quite the same as it was when he was in his hero form, but it still brought back enough memories of long hours in front of the computer to be slightly comforting. Start from the beginning. First off, is Eraserhead all right? What? Izuku looked at the screen helplessly. Even though it seemed like the world had stopped for him, the fight was still going. Eraserhead was still slowly being overwhelmed by the cannon fodder as Shigaraki and Kurogiri watched impassively, as if they hadn't just casually left a body in the middle of the plaza. Eraserhead is fine, Mei reported, apparently recovering from the shock a little quicker than Izuku had been able to. The villain killed one of his own men. He killed him because of me, Mei-chan. Izuku's voice cracked. That man is dead because of me. Mei looked at him, the emotions in her eyes swirling between pity, helplessness, and something else that Izuku couldn't name. I know, but they're gonna kill a lot more people if we do nothing. Izuku took a deep breath and let it out slowly before addressing the teachers and throwing himself into his analysis. He could deal with everything later. The leader's name is Shigaraki. He has a disintegration quirk that seems to spread from wherever he touches. Most likely a 5-point activation quirk, just like Uraraka's gravity nullification. Unknown whether he can control the speed with which something turns to dust. The warp quirk user's name is Kurogiri, and he appears to be the right hand, also more mature than Shigaraki. All other villains are most likely hired muscle. Izuku still didn't want to use the guns that Netsu had mentioned, but he went into the defense system and started booting them up anyway. If Shigaraki was willing to kill so easily, Izuku had to be prepared. Mei was right. All he could worry about right now was making sure Shigaraki didn't kill anyone else. Mei-chan, you take over the mountain zone. Izuku said. I need to focus on the plaza. Will do, Izu-kun. Mei turned toward the screen and her eyes widened. Oh my god. What? Izuku turned to check what was wrong, only to end up with Mei's hands over his eyes. Mei-chan. What are you doing? I can't see. What's going on over there? Powerloader demanded. Kids. We're fine, Powerloader sensei. Mei yelled. It's just that Izu-kun doesn't need to see that. I literally just saw someone die, Mei-chan. Izuku grumbled. What's worse than that? Well, it's just that. Mei's voice sounded embarrassed. One of the girls in the mountain zone had a costume malfunction. I knew that costume was going to be a problem. Izuku grumbled, Her quirk works through skin exposure Mei-chan, it's not a big deal. If I promise not to look, can I have my eyes back? Hatsume, please. Present Mike sounded somewhat desperate. Midoriya needs to help Shota. Oh. Mei snatched her hands back as if she'd just been burned. I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking. Sometimes trauma is like that. Hound Dog interrupted patiently. Experiences like this make the brain want to cling to any sense of normalcy it can get. Honestly, you kids are first years and aren't even in the hero course. You shouldn't be going through any of this. If we weren't involved, you still wouldn't know about the attack. Izuku said resolutely. We're fine. Crap, Shigaraki's on the move. Izuku turned up the volume so he could hear Shigaraki's muttering. 24 seconds, then 20, then 17. It took a moment for Izuku to make the connection, and when it did, he couldn't help feeling like he'd somehow gotten caught in Todoroki's ice quirk. He's figured out Eraserhead's tell. Eraserhead tensed and jumped away from Shigaraki as he ran forward, and Izuku sighed in relief. I was worried for a second that Eraserhead had been too busy to see Shigaraki's quirk in action, but he's keeping his distance, so he's safe for now. Eraserhead prides himself on having good situational awareness. Nedzu said. He wouldn't be such an effective hero if he was unable to multitask. I've gotten almost all of the students out of the disaster zones. Mei reported. Most of them are heading toward the entrance, but a few are trying to make their way toward the plaza. Get in their way, please, Miss Hatsume. Nedzu ordered. We need to keep the students away from the most dangerous villains as much as possible. But Hatsume, Powerloader said her name like it was a warning, which it probably was, although Izuku had no idea what the punishment for disobedience would be. Most likely no access to flammable materials for a week. Fine, have it your way. Mei huffed and started typing. Izuku glanced over to see Katsuki and Kirishima struggling to keep their feet as a mini-earthquake shook the path they were on. It wouldn't hold them back for long, but he trusted Mei to keep them safe. Turning back to his own screen, Izuku stopped breathing as he realized that Shigaraki had stopped the cat and mouse game he'd been playing with Eraserhead and was now scratching his neck again. This couldn't be good. Stupid cheater. Shigaraki muttered. If it wasn't for the stupid extra player with the cheat codes, I could have taken Eraserhead out easily. His quirk isn't good for long drawn-out battles with big groups. No. Good hero. Eraserhead panted and shot his capture weapon toward Shigaraki. Is a one-trick pony. Kurogiri appeared beside Shigaraki and the capture weapon disappeared harmlessly into a portal, only to reappear at Eraserhead's ankles. Eraserhead rolled away and his hair started floating. The portals disappeared, cutting the capture weapon neatly in half as they closed. Izuku shivered slightly. If Kurogiri closed one of his portals while someone was halfway through. Would you like me to take care of him? Kurogiri asked. Shigaraki stopped scratching his neck and grinned widely enough that Izuku could see the expression behind the hand on his face. No. Eraserhead might be cool, but he doesn't know that I'm not the final boss here. Nomu. Izuku didn't know how he'd missed the giant shadow that slammed Eraserhead into the ground, but if he'd thought about it at all, he would have assumed that the bird villain with an exposed brain was just another one of the thugs Shigaraki had hired. He would have been wrong. What even is that thing? Mei's voice raised in barely concealed panic, and Izuku decided he didn't like it when she panicked. That was supposed to be his job. I don't know. Izuku stalled for a moment, ignoring the teacher's barrage of questions on the other end of the comm as he analyzed the villain. Everyone shut up. Eraserhead is still alive. At least, Izuku hoped he was, but he could have sworn he'd seen the hero moving around a little, even after whatever that thing was had stopped beating him, but the students are on their own now. He's not going to be able to fight anyone with those injuries. As for what attacked him, well, it doesn't seem human. It has a strength aspect to its quirk, definitely, but it also seems to have some sort of bird mutation, which should normally come with more fragile bones and diminished physical strength that this villain obviously hasn't shown signs of. Izuku trailed off as Shigaraki started speaking again. Bragging, his brain corrected. What do you think of him? Shigaraki said gleefully. He's the bioengineered anti-symbol of peace, but you can call him Nomu. He's got his own set of cheat codes to beat the big boss. Bioengineered anti-symbol of peace? Mei repeated, horrified. That thing was invented? That's somebody's baby? Their backup is going to be coming soon. Between the student that escaped and that noob with the cheat codes, it's game over. Shigaraki growled, and brought his hand up to start scratching his neck again, only to freeze right before he made contact. How about we leave the symbol of peace a present to break his pride when he gets here? He lunged toward Eraserhead, but Izuku was already ready. He shot every weapon he could think of at the space between Shigaraki and the hero, but apparently Kurogiri was already expecting his attack. Each of the rockets, bullets and other projectiles he's launched were effortlessly redirected upwards, harmlessly exploding near the ceiling. Portions of the dome shattered from the shrapnel and bullets, and the remaining thugs ran for cover as shards started raining down, but even falling glass wasn't enough to stop Shigaraki from grabbing Eraserhead's face just like he had grabbed the blocker earlier. Mei and Izuku both held their breath as all 5 of Shigaraki's fingers made contact. Nothing happened. You really are so cool, Eraserhead. Shigaraki grinned. At least he seemed to respect Eraserhead as an opponent, not that that would be enough to keep him alive. Nomu. Izuku had already launched another net at the Nomu, hoping to cancel his quirk in time to soften the blow, making sure to shoot a rocket at Kurogiri at the same time in an attempt to distract him. The half-baked plan worked and the net wrapped around the monster, but even with the net canceling his quirk, the Nomu still slammed Eraserhead's face into the concrete with an audible crack and the hero finally went completely limp. Shigaraki simply huffed and disintegrated the net like it was nothing before turning his attention back toward the now unconscious Eraserhead. How far out are you guys? Izuku's brain whirled with a million plans as he addressed the heroes. About 5 minutes. Nedzu said. But All Might could get there in 2 it. Do it. Izuku ordered. Power up and get over there. I'll distract them. Izu-kun, Mei warned, don't you dare. Young Midoriya, I really must insist. All Might's voice overlapped Mei's and the other heroes as they tried to stop him, but Izuku resolutely ignored them as he connected to the PA system. Shigaraki froze with his hand only inches away from Eraserhead's face as Izuku's voice, slightly warped from both the technology and the acoustics of the building, echoed around the USJ. Hello. He took a deep breath and forced a shaky smile onto his face in a poor attempt to both assure Mei and to make himself sound more confident. You seem to be having a little trouble. Chapter 23. Cheat Code. Shigaraki's entire body contorted in rage as he frantically looked around for whoever was speaking. You're the cheater who switched up the levels. Who are you? Izuku looked to Mei, who was looking at him with wide eyes. There was no way he could tell Shigaraki his real name. The villain would be able to track him too easily and that would put Mom, Mei, even Katsuki's family in danger because Shigaraki could choose to target any of them to get to him. He also couldn't say he was Deku for many of the same reasons. He'd grown up with that nickname and it was way too strongly associated with Izuku Midoriya. It wouldn't take more than a few days of asking around to figure out who Deku really was, if Shigaraki asked the right people. As his thoughts whirled, a memory of something that Shigaraki had said earlier popped into his mind and Izuku had to hold in a breathy sigh of relief. What kind of a question is that? You said it yourself, Shigaraki. For this to work, Izuku needed to be someone Shigaraki could respect. Someone confident and an opponent who he knew could counter him at every turn. He gave a cocky smile and leaned back in his chair, hoping to channel that same energy into his voice. I'm cheat code. Nedzu was beginning to understand Yamada's panic now. He was torn between bursting with pride for his student's quick thinking and wanting to ground him until he was 30 for his recklessness. Why did he have to call attention to himself like that? The villains had a warp quirk, for goodness sakes. What would happen if they simply warped over to the main campus and attacked Midoriya directly? He was quirkless and didn't have any strength or training to defend himself with. Nedzu didn't want to lose his student before he'd even really had a chance to teach him. But now wasn't the time for panic, now was the time for his intelligence to shine. It was the time for damage control and protecting his reckless student from himself so that his reckless student could protect the other children from the villains. Was this what parenthood felt like? Everyone, please only refer to Midoriya as cheat code from now on. Nedzu ordered. Especially when we arrive at the USJ. We don't want him to become a target. Yes, sir. All Might's voice echoed over the comms. Young Iida is heading your way. He tried to stop me, but I decided to leave him to you. Ah, I see the little listener now, Yamada said. Iida was kicking up dust as he headed their way, almost slid as he saw the teachers and skidded quickly to a stop. Teachers. There is an attack. I wanted to warn All Might, but he ignored. We know, youngin. We done been told by. Snipe trailed off and glanced at Nedzu, who shook his head. Snipe nodded resolutely, by a third party. Come with us, you best give your report on the way. For a moment, Nedzu thought that Iida would collapse in relief, but after a second, he squared his shoulders and started running back the way he had come as the teachers followed. Yes, sir. As Iida filled in the gaps and described the attack, Nedzu couldn't help but feel like they couldn't get there soon enough. On screen, Shigaraki was attacking his neck like it had personally offended him. Where are you, cheat code? Tell me. That's the way your warp quirk works, isn't it? Izuku asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. You can't come stop me if you don't actually know exactly where I am. That's why you were so angry when your signal blocker couldn't tell you my location. Is. Cheat code. Mei said softly. I've unlocked the doors. Most of the students are evacuating now, but there are a couple overachievers I'm having to keep away from the plaza. Izuku nodded in acknowledgement. Faintly over the comms, he heard the sound of people cheering and smiled. It had been 2 minutes. That's the thing about having the cheat codes, Shigaraki. Izuku said. Not only can I change the levels, but the boss is on my side. What the actual goddamn fuck? Bakugo growled as yet another wall collapsed in front of them, blocking their path for the 5th time in 5 minutes. Ojiro was secretly relieved. Dude, have you noticed that the walls only collapse if we try heading toward the fight? Maybe if we try heading toward the entrance. Shut up, shitty hair. Bakugo screamed. I'm gonna take down their stupid escape route and a few walls aren't gonna be enough to stop me. But did you hear that dude on the intercom? Ojiro asked. This cheat code guy is probably doing this. He's probably working with the teachers, so if we just leave. I'm not gonna let some coward who won't even show his face get in my way. Bakugo yelled and exploded another piece of rubble so he could get through. Now are you gonna help me or not? Ojiro instinctively hardened as an insane burst of wind pressure whipped through the USJ and he hoped he wasn't imagining the booming voice that followed. I am here. Toshinori wasn't smiling. The situation was just as bad as young Midoriya had made it out to be. A broken Aizawa was pinned under a massive villain that he assumed to be the Nomu that he had been warned of, so now, his main duty was to save his coworker. If only he'd been here. Toshinori lunged forward, calling the full power of One for All into the punch. Dust whipped up from the force of the attack and Toshinori was just getting ready to grab Aizawa and get him out of there when he realized that the villain. No, the monster hadn't even budged. That's not going to work, All Might. A young man with dirty blue hair and a hand over his face cackled loudly. Nomu has cheat codes of his own to kill the big boss. The only way you're going to be able to beat him is to slowly gouge out his flesh, and I don't think he's going to let you do that. Shock absorption. Young Midoriya muttering echoed around the plaza. But he had a strength. No super strength was never his quirk, was it? That's why he was still able to hurt Eraserhead, even with the net, which should have blocked. You're not as smart as you like to pretend, cheat code. The young man, who Toshinori realized must be Shigaraki, the leader, said gleefully, "Are you forgetting that Nomu is a mod? He doesn't have to follow the rules." Toshinori really should read up on the teenagers' lingo if this was how the next generation of villains were going to talk, because seriously, they might as well be speaking Greek. All that he got from that was that Nomu was dangerous, but he'd already known that. Young Midoriya's observations, however, were much more useful. Shock absorption, huh? Toshinori rushed the Nomu and grabbed him from behind, yanking him up and forcing him to let go of Aizawa. "Thanks for telling me how to beat him." He bent backwards, careful to avoid the unconscious Aizawa as he suplexed the villain into the ground. If he could just stop him from moving. Ow. That couldn't be good. Izuku turned on some fans so that the dust would clear faster and he could get a clear visual of the fight. All Might had managed to get a hand on the Nomu, but unfortunately, the Nomu had also gotten a hand on him. Kurogiri had created a warp gate right where All Might had tried to bury the Nomu and created another one under All Might so the villain could grab him. The Nomu was digging his fingers into All Might's side and had apparently managed to open his old scar, if the blood staining All Might's shirt was any indication. All Might desperately tried to pry the Nomu's hands away from his left side, but the angle was all wrong and Izuku still couldn't get his mind off what Shigaraki had said about Nomu not following the rules. What had he meant by that? Good work, Kurogiri. Shigaraki grinned. We've got him right where we want him now. Normally, I wouldn't want blood dirtying the inside of my warp gates. Kurogiri said calmly. But for a hero such as yourself, I am willing to make an exception. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized what their plan was. The Nomu was strong, so if he was able to pull All Might halfway through the portal. Izuku couldn't let that happen, but what could he? He muted his connection to the USJ's PA system. "Nedzu, how far out are you?" "We can see the building," Nedzu said. "We'll be there momentarily." Izuku's mind raced as he thought about the quirks they had available. "Is Iida still with you?" "Yes, he is," Present Mike said. "But we were about to send him to check on the other little listeners." "All right. Here's what you need to do." Izuku kept an eye on the plaza, where Shigaraki seemed to be taking his time toying with All Might before killing him. "Cementos. Liquefy the cement under your feet so you can slide easily and have Iida use his quirk to push you to the USJ and get you there faster. If you can harden it right after you've passed so Iida doesn't have to worry about slipping, that'd be best. When you get inside, use your cement to immobilize the villain holding All Might. Present Mike. You use your quirk to tell the students to get out of the way. Got it? Yeah. Hey, kids. Clear a path for us, ya dig?" Izuku noted that the comms were programmed to decrease the volume of Mike's voice when he activated his quirk. He'd definitely have to take a look at that coding after this was over. That was so cool. He listened to Cementos briefly relay his instructions to Iida and then there was a sound of an engine before a gray and white blur launched through the front doors, stopping just before the steps. Within seconds, the cement under the plaza had come alive and hardened just short of All Might, neatly encasing the monster. Crap. Shigaraki scratched his neck. The heroes are here. Perhaps it would be best for us to make our exit. Kurogiri said, already making a portal to leave. No. We can't let them get away. Izuku yelled. Does he even have a real body to target? Is. Cheat code Kun. Mei yelled and pointed at the screen. If he's got armor, he's got a body. I overheard Rock Kun and Bomb Kun saying something about it. And armor is made of metal, which, Izuku scanned through the weapons until he found a taser, then reconnected his audio. Wasn't your objective to kill All Might? That set Shigaraki off. Show your stupid face, you cheater. If it wasn't for you changing the rules, our quest would be done by now. Tamura Shigaraki, calm down. Kurogiri was so distracted trying to calm Shigaraki's most recent tantrum that he didn't see the attack coming until the electricity hit him in the back. Immediately, he seized up and fell to the ground unconscious, and the mist surrounding his body temporarily dissipated just enough for Izuku to see the man underneath, though the effect disappeared before he could get a good look at the villain's face. Knocking him out had also caused the portal to close, slicing the Nomu in half. Izuku felt like he was going to throw up. Sure, the Nomu didn't seem human, but he probably was, and it was Izuku's attack that caused the portal to close and kill him. Wait, how was the Nomu still moving? I told you, cheat code. Shigaraki gloated as the Nomu completely regenerated his missing limbs. Nomu doesn't follow the rules. How? Izuku watched in shock. Multiple quirks? That would change everything we know about. Fight now, nerd later. May reminded him. Man, these students really want to fight, don't they? It's just these three, but I'm running out of stuff to throw at them. Izuku muted himself and looked over at the screens May was working with. It was Katsuki and Kirishima on one and Todoroki on the other. All extremely powerful students and all probably itching for a fight. Izuku knew he couldn't trust Katsuki not to try to explode Shigaraki the moment he saw him, but one of the other two. Well, maybe it'd be worth the risk to get Aizawa out of there so that All Might could fight without worrying about hurting him even more. Let Todoroki through, Izuku ordered. It would be too difficult to separate Kirishima from Katsuki. I'll handle it from there. May looked at him skeptically. Are you sure? Nedzu said. I'll take the blame if something happens, Mei-chan. Izuku said. Just do it. This was the oddest villain attack Shoto had ever been a part of, not that he had many other experiences to compare it to. First, the villains breaking into a secure facility, then the absolutely pitiful efforts of the front line, and finally, the way that the building itself had seemed to come alive to prevent him from helping in the main fight. That last one was probably due to cheat code, whoever that was. Shoto had heard his father ranting about idiots in support who didn't know when to shut up and take orders, by which he meant to say that they thought they could tell Endeavor what to do. Cheat code must be someone like that. Which basically meant that Shoto liked him already. That didn't mean, however, that he was going to stop fighting. He had been training his entire life to be a hero, so he could more than handle these weak villains. It was stupid to make Aizawa keep fighting alone and outnumbered when Shoto could help. Cheat code, however, seemed determined to make him leave, which meant that it was both relieving and incredibly suspicious when the environment suddenly stopped fighting him. Shoto wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth, so he rushed toward the plaza as quickly as he could and took stock of the situation. It was chaos. The teachers had arrived and were beginning to fight the last of the cannon fodder that Aizawa and his classmates hadn't taken care of, but they apparently weren't out of the woods yet. A giant villain was matching All Might punch while trying to maneuver around Aizawa, who was on the ground, but appeared to be waking up. The warp villain was on the ground as well, but the leader was using the fight between All Might and the monster to shield himself from any potential attacks from the teachers. Shoto, however, might be able to get a clear shot at him. It would put him at risk, especially since he didn't know what the villain's quirk was, but living with his father was a risk too, so it was just what heroes did. It was only years of his father's training that kept him from jumping when a loud voice echoed from a speaker right behind him. Use your ice as a slide to get Eraserhead out of there and take him to the entrance. Shoto knew there was no point in looking around. Since it was almost definitely cheat code giving the orders, wouldn't it be better to attack the leader directly? Prioritize the rescue. Cheat code pleaded. All Might can't fight at full power if Eraserhead is in the way, and he's in no condition to keep fighting right now. Izuku held his breath as Todoroki hesitated, looking between Shigaraki and Eraserhead before nodding. Izuku let out a sigh of relief. There had been no guarantee that Todoroki would trust him, especially since the students probably didn't know he was working with the teachers, but he'd been hoping. A slick track of ice shot forward from Todoroki's foot and froze the ground under Eraserhead. Then more ice piled underneath him until gravity took control and Eraserhead, who was now awake, if extremely disoriented, was able to slide away from the fight. Honestly, on second thought, sliding him probably hadn't been the safest option with his injuries, but it was the only thing Izuku could think of that wouldn't put Todoroki at risk, and he'd promised Nezu that he would protect the students. Hopefully Eraserhead wouldn't be too angry at him. All Might glanced over to Todoroki with a nod. Take care of him, young Todoroki. For about half a second, Izuku wondered if Todoroki would attack the villains anyway, but then Eraserhead groaned quietly. Todoroki's eyes filled with something unreadable, and he nodded to All Might before helping Eraserhead back to the entrance. Good. Now onto the Nomu. There's no way to know what quirks the Nomu has, Izuku broadcasted, grateful that he'd insisted on All Might saving his strength for the fight, but if he was designed to beat you, All Might, he's probably got what it takes to withstand you at full strength. Then I'll just have to go beyond that, All Might said. Plus Ultra. The surrounding fights came to a gradual stop as everyone had to anchor themselves to avoid being blown away from the whirlwind that was created as the two exchanged blows faster than Izuku could see. He couldn't help fanboying just a bit as All Might used a final punch to knock the Nomu through the ceiling. Whoa. Well, villain. All Might grinned. You're outnumbered and your ultimate weapon is out of commission. Are you really sure you can beat this level? No. Cheaters. Shigaraki lunged forward and Izuku's breath caught as he realized that All Might was steaming. Going beyond his quirk's limits like that probably took the last of his strength, but he should have enough left to dodge. Shouldn't he? Shigaraki screamed as Snipe shot his hand and one of his legs, but the rest of the bullets were redirected by a purple warp gate. Izuku swore and reached for his keyboard. When had Kurogiri woken up? Had they all been so distracted by All Might's fight that no one had noticed? He tried to think of something to stop the villains, but the warp gate was already passing over Shigaraki, taking him to God knew where. Izuku caught one final complaint from Shigaraki right as the portal closed. Sensei lied to me. All Might's not weaker at all. Why didn't he tell me about the cheater? He sighed and muted his mic as he sat back, suddenly extremely tired as the adrenaline he'd been running on for the past 30 minutes left him in a rush. Next to him, Mei was in a similar state. Present Mike had taken Eraserhead from Todoroki and was now handing him off to paramedics, who were also taking 13 and a maxed out Kaminari. Katsuki looked pissed and Kirishima was trying to comfort him as Hound Dog escorted them out of the building. Cementos created a rough wall to block the student's view and nodded to All Might, who took that as his cue to deflate with a bloody cough. It was only after he deflated that he seemed to remember about Izuku and Mei, and he looked at the nearest camera in panic. Mei's eyes widened at All Might's small form. What the? I don't think I was supposed to see that. Izuku glanced over at her and he knew he should be way more worried about her finding out All Might's secret, but quite honestly, he was too tired to panic anymore. Yeah. He does that sometimes. For his part, All Might looked slightly exasperated. Young cheat code, this is serious. It's just Mei. Izuku shrugged. Better than the villains or all of Class 1A. That's part of why we needed to keep the students away from the fight, in addition to protecting them. Didn't want anybody seeing that, you know? And she's not gonna tell anyone. All Might, right, Mei? Right. Mei collapsed back into her chair. Okay. Yeah. Whatever, the number one hero has some secret transformation quirk. No big deal. All Might coughed again. Greatly appreciate your discretion, young. Cheat code? Nezu cut off All Might's rambling before it could begin, making both Izuku and Mei jump. Are you and your assistant all right? Izuku and Mei exchanged a look and she giggled. We just beat the crap out of a bunch of villains, we're exhausted. And Izu-kun is my assistant, not the other way around. Nezu chucked knowingly. I hid a blanket in your desk when I was creating your room. You never know when you'll need a nap after a long night of working, after all. Izuku raised an eyebrow as Mei dug through the desk's drawers and pulled out a giant fluffy monstrosity that really seemed larger than should realistically fit where they found it. Mei gasped and nuzzled her face into the blanket. Ew. Izu-kun. It's so soft. Rest. Nedzu said cheerfully. You deserve it. You did well. Izuku froze. Nedzu was proud of him? Had that ever happened with a teacher before? What was he supposed to do? Should he say something? How was he supposed to handle this? Mei quite literally pulled him out of his thoughts as she dragged him to the floor and wrapped both of them in the blanket. Izuku was vaguely aware he should probably be panicking about something right now, but he was too exhausted to do anything but take the calm out of his ear and pass out. And if Shinso happened to take a few pictures for blackmail purposes when he dropped by during lunch, well, Izuku could always find a way to hack his phone later and steal them. Chapter 24. Friendship. They cancelled school the day after the USJ attack to increase security, which meant that Izuku was bored. Normally, he'd be taking notes on heroes or cool quirks that he saw on the news, but all that the news was covering was the attack and he wasn't quite ready to think about that yet. He knew that he should analyze Shigaraki's quirk or Kurogiri's warp quirk or even the Nomu's mess of quirks, but every time he thought about the whole attack, he just froze. Hound Dog had pulled both him and Mei aside before they left school the day before and warned him that something like that might happen and that it was normal and expected, but he still felt guilty and frustrated. He didn't understand it. It's not like the villain's quirks weren't interesting. He just couldn't bring himself to think about them without panicking about the fact that he'd challenged a powerful villain or thinking through everything he did wrong that led to 13 and Eraserhead being hurt. What he really wanted to do was work on his quirk reports for the first years, but that required the notebooks in his workroom and the students' files, which could only be accessed from a computer. He'd already emailed Nedzu asking if he could come in and work on them, but had been told to take a well-deserved rest, so he'd only half-jokingly texted Mei and asked if she'd be down to help him break into UA. She'd said no. Sahir Izuku was scrolling through his keep watching section of Netflix for the 5th time because nothing sounded good. It sucked. Izuku was just debating whether it'd be worth it to get takeout for lunch when someone started pounding on the door. Izuku jumped a foot in the air and somehow ended up hiding behind the couch. Had the villains found him somehow? Was his poor attempt at a persona not enough to hide him? Izuku frowned as the person outside knocked again. Shigaraki wouldn't knock. He'd just disintegrate the door. Same with Kurogiri. If he knew where Izuku lived, he'd warp straight into the house. But if it wasn't the villains, then who could it be? Izu-kun. I swear to God, if you went to UA on your own. Izuku squeaked and raced to throw open the door and let Mei in. She already had her arm raised to knock again, while Shinso stood next to her looking slightly lost. Mei didn't waste any time pushing past him and dragging him back into his apartment by the hand. Mei-chan. Izuku stuttered. Not that I'm not happy, but why are you here? Making sure you don't do something stupid, apparently. Shinso deadpanned. Hey. Izuku gave him a glare, then started grumbling under his breath. It's not like I would have broken into UA on my own, that'd be stupid. Shinso raised an eyebrow, like breaking into UA at all wouldn't be. Yeah, Izu-kun. Mei said. Look what happened to those villains yesterday. They had to deal with you. Mei-chan. That's supposed to be a secret. Izuku glanced over at Shinso in a panic, but he just shrugged. She already told me you guys were involved when she texted me and dragged me here. Shinso said. And it's not like everyone didn't already know there was an attack. Honestly, I'm not even surprised, you two were like chaotic deities or something. Plus, there had to be a reason why I found you cuddling under your desk during lunch instead of eating. Mei cackled over the sound of Izuku spluttering, oh extra credit kun. You know us so well already. Plus, I had to tell him because I needed an extra brain. Shinso's eyes widened slightly before almost immediately going back to his default bored expression. You really need to practice not sounding ominous. Hey, that's boring. Mei shrugged and slammed her notebook open on the coffee table. Look at these. Izuku and Shinso both leaned over the notebook and Izuku froze when he realized what was inside. What? Mei-chan. I don't need a logo. Mei scoffed. Of course you need a logo, Izu-kun. Imagine. Heroes are looking for the perfect analyst to help them on an important mission. Who else are they gonna pick besides cheat code? The victor of the USJ. Shinso didn't bother hiding his laughter as Izu-kun blushed and covered his face with his arms. Mei-chan. Hence why I needed Shiso. Mei huffed. So. Extra credit kun. Which of these ideas is your favorite? Hey. Shinso grinned at him and pulled the notebook toward him. Ooh, these are cool. Yeah. Mei grinned. I'm thinking about making stamps, maybe even a paper embosser, you know, one of those texture things that leaves an imprint on the page. Oh, I like that idea. Shinso said, still grinning. The traitor. He was enjoying this, wasn't he? Me too. Mei said. It'll be perfect for when Izu-kun finishes his reports on the first years, because then he can just put his logo on the final page. Izuku finally got enough control over his vocal cords to stop mindlessly sputtering and interrupt the two before they plotted to make him famous or something. Guys. Don't I get any say in this? Of course, Izu-kun. Mei said sweetly. You can pick the logo. Izuku scowled at her, but when she didn't give in, he sighed and pulled the notebook toward him. Shinso wasn't lying, they were really cool. There were a few in various stages of completion from where Mei had obviously gotten bored before finishing them, but they still gave him a really good idea of what was going through her head as she designed them. She had obviously tried to lean into the gamer aesthetic with cheat code, which Izuku could appreciate, even if he really didn't want a logo. A few of them were based on the D-pad from video game controllers, with different colors on each button. A few of them looked more like crosses, while others had buttons and others were more stylized. One even showed the D-pad on the controller, which Izuku thought was a nice touch, even if it made the logo look a little busy. Another one had the same problem, even though it went with a more hacking or PC gaming aesthetic. It was a laptop, and on the screen it had his codename written as if it was a piece of coding. There were only a few keys on the keyboard, though. Just the A, the B and the spacebar, which said start for some reason. Mei, why is this computer so weird? Izuku finally asked. I wouldn't be able to code anything with that keyboard. And why just those keys? It's because it's based on a famous cheat code. Shinso said. When Mei and Izuku both turned to stare at him, he shrugged defensively. What? No one wanted to play with the future villain, so I ended up spending a lot of time playing video games. No one wanted to play with me either, but I ended up chasing hero fights. Izuku pointed out. And I ended up inventing. Mei added. But that's not important. Didn't you look at how cheat code is written? Izuku leaned down to see the paper a little better. Why you mean the arrows on some of the letters? Ah. Mei groaned. Izu-kun, you're hopeless. I thought you were supposed to be super nerdy. That doesn't mean I know everything about video games. Izuku yelled. I spent forever on that. I am sorry. It's a stylized version of the Konami code. Shinso interrupted. Up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, start. The arrows are all in your codename. 2 ups on the H, 2 downs on the A, 1 left and 1 right on the T, another left and right on the E. Then the rest of the code is on the keyboard. It's a nice touch. Oh. Izuku looked a little closer. That makes sense. The more he looked at it, he really liked the stylized way that one was written, with the arrows paying homage to a real cheat code. Honestly, it looked kinda badass, like it was something that Katsuki would be jealous of. Which obviously meant that Izuku had to have it. He still didn't like the laptop though. Would it be possible to combine that writing with one of the others? Of course. May said excitedly. One of the advantages of that one is that you could just use it on its own and use it as a signature if anyone ever asks for your autograph. And now he was blushing again. May-chan. I'm an analyst. No one's ever going to ask me for my autograph. Never say never, Izu-kun. May cackled. Can we just pick one to combine it with? Izuku pouted. I like this one. Shinso pointed to the page, though I'm also partial to the ones with glitching effects, but they would be hard to use as a signature. I'm not going to be signing anything. Izuku insisted. He looked at the logo Shinso was pointing to, which was one of the D-pad inspired ones. Each button was like an arrow pointing to the center and the top three were purple, green, and pink, while the bottom one just said cheat code. I like it, but what do the colors mean? They're us. May said proudly. Shinso blinked at her. What? See. May gestured animatedly toward the page, pink for me. Green for Izu-kun. And purple for extra credit-kun. Shinso was trying to hide his nervousness under a layer of skepticism, but to Izuku, he just looked slightly nauseous. Why am I on there? May shrugged. I needed another color and you're the first person I thought of. We could probably use another color. Izuku offered quickly. Why not orange for Powerloader? Then the colors would clash. May complained. Purple works best. Izuku really didn't want to make Shinso uncomfortable, which being included on the logo was clearly doing. How about we just make those three buttons black? Then they'll contrast well with the white button and we can put the styled cheat code signature on that one. Ew. I like it. May said. I still like the color, but black and white will work well too. It's all techie. Shinso shot Izuku a grateful look and he smiled back as May quickly sketched out the new logo. What do you think? Izuku and Shino leaned over the page and Izuku couldn't hold back a smile. Even though he still didn't think he needed a logo, it had turned out pretty cool and it was a fun thing to do with his friends. He liked it. Now all that's left is to engrave it onto everything you own. Shinso said with a shit-eating grin. Never mind. Next time they needed to pull Shinso out of class, Izuku was going to send May. See how he liked being called extra credit-kun in front of his whole class. What? He was just practicing being petty. Chapter 25. Strength. On the one hand, Izuku probably shouldn't have snuck out of the house at dawn to get to Uwa early and work on the analysis packets for the hero course. On the other, May was already in the lab when he arrived, so it couldn't be too bad. Making up for lost time? Izuku laughed when he saw her. If you missed inventing so much you should have taken me up on my offer yesterday. Oh shut up Izu-kun. May swatted at him, but Izuku simply grinned and sidestepped as she grumbled. It's not like breaking in when security was down for improvements would even be a challenge anyway. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Are you saying you want to break in another day? Maybe test their new defenses. May's eyes widened. Do you think Nedzu would give us permission? I could make so many babies for it and you could practice your hacking and can you ask him? Maybe after the sports festival. Izuku laughed. But don't you still have to fine-tune your support items for that? And we both still have to help Shinso get ready. Is that why you're here so early? May asked. Preparing for the sports festival? No. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I couldn't sleep. May looked at him with pity and a level of understanding that made Izuku feel slightly guilty. Me either. Nightmares? Izuku sighed and nodded. If I had. Well, I wanted to come in and maybe get an abbreviated packet done for each student. If they'd had them a few days ago. They still wouldn't have had time to implement your suggestions. May interrupted. You know that, right? I know. But, Izuku groaned in frustration. But I just can't help but wonder. If maybe their support items were better, then maybe they wouldn't have had to go through that. May finished. It threw Izuku for a loop, but for the first time since he'd arrived, he actually looked at the invention she was currently working on. It was something like a taser, but didn't have a power source, meaning that it was most likely designed for someone with an electricity quirk, one that the user couldn't consciously direct or control. Izuku saw a stack of blueprints under that one, and he guessed that if he looked through them, he'd see one for most members of 1A and maybe some of 1B as well. You couldn't sleep either. I just need to make sure they have the best babies they can get. May said it like that was all there was to it, but even though he really hadn't known her long, Izuku could still tell she was using pragmatism to hide the tangled mess of emotions underneath. Isn't that what a support engineer does? Gives a hero their best chance. They said together, then ended up laughing. We're a mess, aren't we? May asked. Yeah, a little. Izuku said. But hey, where's the fun without chaos? I'll be in my workroom if you need me. I still have that blanket, if you need it. Izuku felt slightly hot, and figured it was from the lack of good sleep. May nodded and turned back to her newest baby. It probably won't do much good, but thanks. Izuku nodded and left toward his room when May spoke again. Thank you, she said softly. I don't know what I'd do without you, Izuku. Izuku smiled softly. Me neither. He left his door cracked open and they spent the time before their classmates arrived in companionable silence, working on their own projects. Shoto sat in the back row, half listening to his classmates talk about the USJ attack while mostly lost in his own thoughts. When the villains had shown up, he had mostly just been annoyed? Was that the right word? But it was expected, wasn't it? Villains attacked heroes. It was what they did. It made sense. What didn't make sense was the mysterious third party that had seemed intent on helping them. Shoto wasn't the only one curious either, if his classmates before class conversations were any indication. It was kinda freaky, honestly. Ojiro told Hagakure, who seemed to be hanging on his every word. It was like the building came alive all of a sudden and the fire was on my side. Every time I started going in the wrong direction, it would block my path and it would catch any villains trying to sneak up on me before they even had a chance. It was creepy. But in a cool way, if that makes sense. Cheat code is a force of darkness. Tokiyami said seriously. I cannot describe my experience in any other words than that it was as if a benevolent supernatural entity was haunting the rain itself and bending it to their will. Shut up about that fucking coward. Bakugo exploded and glared at everyone. If this cheat code fucker really wanted to help, he should have shown up in person rather than hiding behind a microphone like a scared little sheep. And he should have let us destroy the damn villains. Come on, Bakubro. You gotta admit it was kinda manly how he protected us like that. Kirishima hit his fists together with a grin. I wanna meet him. And that was the other weird thing, wasn't it? Everyone else who had ended up caught in the zones had said that the building kept fighting them until the very end unless they headed toward the entrance, but cheat code had allowed Shoto to get close enough to save Aizawa. Why him? Why not Kirishima, who was arguably kinder and more likely to listen? Was it just because Shoto had a more powerful quirkle? But Bakugo was powerful enough to fight as well, so if it was just about power, he should have been allowed to reach the plaza as well. If it was about effectiveness rescuing, wouldn't Uraraka have been a better fit? She wanted to be a rescue hero and she could have floated Aizawa out of there. So what made Shoto different? Why choose him out of all of his classmates? Apparently, that was a question for another day because Aizawa chose that moment to walk in. One of his arms was in a thick cast and there was a large piece of gauze taped beneath his eye, but overall, he seemed a lot less injured than Todoroki had expected. He flinched as the class erupted into loud cheers. Aizawa-sensei. You're all right. Ashido exclaimed loudly. We were so worried when we saw Todoroki leading you out. It's fine. Aizawa interrupted. It would have been a lot worse if the villain's full attention had been on me or if Shigaraki had managed to hit me with his quirk, but as it was, the old lady was able to heal most of it. Is 13 sensei? Uraraka asked, worried. They're still in recovery. Aizawa said. Let that be a lesson to you to always be aware of your surroundings. Quirks are dangerous, even and especially your own. Always expect someone to use every weakness against you. You got lucky this time. The thugs the League of Villains sent were low level, and cheat code protected most of you from the inner circle, but when you get out onto the streets, you're going to meet villains who are prepared to do whatever it takes to kill you. If you're not prepared for that, leave now. Nobody left, not that Shoto was surprised. It probably hadn't really hit them yet, he supposed. Shoto didn't leave either. His father could have killed him hundreds of times over if he wasn't so worried about losing his masterpiece, so Shoto was used to the threat of death. Not to mention that the threat of death would become that much more real if he were to refuse to be a hero. Speaking of cheat code, Sue asked tentatively, who is he? Aizawa sighed and muttered something that sounded like problem child before addressing the class. He's an analyst. Kaminari and Ashido tried to interrupt, probably to whine and beg for more info, but Aizawa silenced them with a glare and Todoroki couldn't help but notice that he didn't activate his quirk like he normally would have, so he must not be completely healed yet. He is an analyst and that is all the information you will be getting. The UA staff has decided to keep his identity under wraps to protect him for now, since I think you each can understand why we wouldn't want villains getting their hands on him. So, no, I will not be telling you who he is. Maybe he'll tell you himself eventually, but until then, you'll just have to deal with your curiosity. However, Aizawa used his good arm to pull a stack of papers from his capture weapon. He did stupidly decide to be overactive and give you these. Come up when I call your name. The room instantly dissolved into whispers as Aizawa called up Aoyama and handed him a few papers. He read through them and swore softly in French as the other members of the class were called. When Shoto's name was called, he received a packet with two papers stapled together. The first section gave a brief description of his quirk, while the other sections gave bulleted lists of strengths, weaknesses, and suggestions for improvement. At the end was an imprinted sticker with some kind of logo and cheat code's name. These are abbreviated analyses of your quirks and fighting styles. Aizawa explained once all the packets had been handed out. You'll apparently be receiving full versions near the end of the semester, once cheat code has had more of a chance to see you in action. He went to Nedzu early this morning, however, and insisted we give you these. Use them wisely. Analysts can be a hero's greatest ally or greatest enemy, depending on how you treat them. Whoa dude. Zero yelled. These are awesome. There's more where this came from. That's super cool. More like super freaky. Mineta complained. How does this guy even know so much about us? The class looked toward Aizawa for an answer, only to find that he had already cocooned himself inside his sleeping bag and was slumped against the wall asleep, so he'd be absolutely zero help. Shoto looked more closely at his packet and frowned as he read. Strengths. Ice power. Ice control. Strategic thinking. Weaknesses. Left side is left open to attack. Danger of hypothermia. Suggestions. Use fire half of quirk. The analyst only had part of the picture, but that didn't make Shoto feel any less annoyed at yet another person telling him to use his fire. He didn't have to listen to someone. Shoto froze. Hadn't he decided to trust cheat code in part because Endeavor wouldn't have? Ignoring his advice completely would be exactly what Endeavor would do, but he still couldn't use his fire. There was a loud explosion and Shoto looked up to see Bakugo throwing the remains of his smoking packet out the window, I don't fucking need this loser to tell me what I already fucking know. I don't have impulsivity issues. Aizawa crawled out of his bag, grabbed another packet from his capture weapon and slammed it down on Bakugo's desk. He mentioned you might do that. Be careful with that one. If you explode it, you won't be getting a third. Bakugo reached for the papers, sparks already leaping across his palms, but Aizawa snatched the packet out of his reach. What the fuck, old man? Bakugo. Aizawa said sternly. If you don't want to be a better hero, or a hero at all. Bakugo huffed, but grabbed the papers without setting them on fire and slumped down in his seat, staring at the packet like it had personally offended him. Shoto could relate. If only we could actually meet this analyst in person. Iida lamented loudly. I have a great many questions on how to improve my quirk's functions. Suit yourself. Jiro shivered. It was freaky enough knowing that he could make the ground collapse beneath us at any moment. My money's on him being even scarier in person. What a mad banquet of darkness. Tokiyami muttered. It had already been a long day by the time Hitoshi reached the gym after school and started stretching, considering that Midoriya was probably still trying to pull Hatsume away from whatever invention she was currently working on. Hanging out with the two yesterday had been fun, but his foster parents had yelled at him when he'd gotten home, accusing him of going out and trying to join a gang despite the fact that he'd tried telling them he was going out with friends before he left. Too bad they wouldn't actually let him talk to them. Or at all. And then all everyone was talking about was the hero course. Those lucky students with the perfect quirks and everything laid out for them without having to fight tooth and nail and convince everyone that he deserved every chance that they did. Even his kidnappers had spent the day focused on them, which was annoying, even though he really didn't have any right to be angry, considering that those two had been involved with the attack. At least they didn't think he was a villain. Yet. A slight sound behind him had Hitoshi jumping to his feet and whirling around to see an injured hobo nodding at him approvingly. Good situational awareness. So your cheat code's extra credit project. Oh no. Hitoshi froze as he realized that this wasn't just any injured hobo. He was talking to Eraserhead. Eraserhead knew who he was. Hitoshi forced himself to snap out of his. Well, his hero worship, for lack of a better word. Yes, sir. Eraserhead looked at him appraising Ly. You're doing physical training? Yes, sir. Hitoshi nodded quickly. I'm mostly focusing on speed and flexibility for now, since I don't have time to gain a lot of strength before the sports festival, but there'll be time for that later if you get into the hero course. Eraserhead finished. Don't underestimate stealth, either. You'd be surprised how often it can come in handy. Hitoshi's eyes went wide. Was Eraserhead really giving him advice? He didn't know what to say. What was someone supposed to say when their favorite hero gave them tips? After a too long moment where Shinso was freaking out, Midoriya burst through the door, his jacket covered in some sort of oil that must have exploded from Hatsume's most recent experiment. Shinso. Sorry I'm late, Mei-chan. Oh, Eraserhead. I didn't know you'd. Eraserhead interrupted Midoriya's rambling by bowing and Midoriya instantly turned bright red and started sputtering. What? Eraserhead. Sir, I don't. What? You helped save my students. Eraserhead straightened. Thanking you is only logical. Midoriya looked to Hitoshi helplessly, but he was still reeling from Eraserhead giving him advice. Midoriya turned back to Eraserhead and bowed back. I apologize for not doing more. Eraserhead snorted. I knew you'd be a problem child. I don't know what else I expected. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door and fixed Hitoshi with a look. You have potential. Don't waste it. It's not going to be easy to claim the extra seat in my class. That challenge was apparently what it took to snap Hitoshi out of his trance, and he couldn't help smirking slightly. It won't be easy to be a hero either, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to do it. Eraserhead gave a creepily wide grin and left, allowing the door to swing closed behind him. When he was sure he was gone, Hitoshi deflated. Midoriya, I think I just met somebody even scarier than you are. He ignored Midoriya's sputtering denials as he went back to stretching. He had a sports festival to win, after all.